because I don't know this would have happened. But Joseph was his father's favorite son. He gave him all kind of special gifts and things like that. Can I ask you something? What usually happens to kids like that? They get spoiled rotten. You know, if you're your mom or your daddy's favorite and they favor you above everybody else and all your other brothers or sisters are jealous and they like you better, and every kid figures that they must like somebody else better than them. But bottom line is, if they're doing that to you, and Joseph was the beloved son of his father and all of this, he could have turned into a rotten scoundrel before it was all over. But you know what? God took him, and God let some bad things happen to him, although God's worked with him and helped him along the way. And I think about Joseph turned into one of the finest young men you'll ever see. He's a paragon of virtue as far as the Scripture is concerned. He's a man that resists temptation in the home of his employer. He's a man that stands up for the Lord before others. He's a man that deals rightly with others, even when they dealt wrong with him. He tries to be a godly man. I think that Joseph is a really good example of a young man that the Lord took. He let him undergo a lot of troubles. But when he came out on the other side, he was a lot better man. He was a great man. And he did a lot of good for the cause of the Lord. Joseph was also a man that was willing to be, go through all of this and deal with all of this. The potter, we learned from the story originally in Jeremiah 18, the potter not only has the power to shape, he has the power to reshape. Now that was kind of what he was talking about in that text. He said that the vessel had got marred. Something got off with it. It wasn't quite straight with him. It didn't look like he wanted it to look. So he said the jar that he was making from the clay became flawed in the potter's hand. So he made it into another jar as it seemed right for him to do. I don't think that this is trying to imply that was God's fault. It's just simply pointing out it's what happened. It's just the way it is. I don't guess any potter starts off to make a marred, vessel of some kind. So he took it and he transformed it into another jar, one that seemed good to him. And what we know is that's what God's trying to do. He's trying to turn us into something else. God's not here to promote your self-esteem. He's here to tell you this is what you need to put off and this is what you need to put on. Take these things out of your life and add these other things in. So he says, put off concerning your former conduct the old man which grew corrupt according to the deceitful lust, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you might put on the new man which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. The real truth about it is God doesn't look at you and say, I'm talking about He adopts you into His family and say, oh, you're so perfect, you just look perfect just like you are. He says, a lot of things need to change here, but I'll help you. I want to take all these things off of you, and I want you to put on these new things. I want to transform you. So you might say when God gets us, we're marred and we're messed up, and He wants to reshape you into something far better and far different. And that's God's whole plan. That's what He decided to do for us. He wants to reshape our lives. And if we get off, even as a Christian, into sin, He wants to reshape our lives. God's going to always want to be making something else out of you. He's not here, again, to glorify you and your self-esteem and pump you up and make you feel better about you. God's main goal is to turn you into what He sees as fit for Him. Make you into something better, something worthwhile out of all of us. And if we're God's people, then what has to happen is we got to be the kind of people that says, okay, then I want to be reshaped. If that's God's plan, don't buck Him, yield to Him. I want my character reshaped by Him. I don't want it molded by the world. I don't want to be molded into what they want me to be. We want God to mold us and shape us and reshape us, especially if we've gone wrong, if we've become marred, then please God, help me to reshape into what I need to be and make me something more pleasing in your sight. That's the goal. I might remind you too, if you think about what's said there, what Jeremiah saw was something that was ongoing. I went down to the potter's house. There he was working away at the wheel. I would suggest to you that none of us are where we might like to be. That we're ongoing. None of us have gotten yet to where we need to be entirely. I mean, there's stages of life and things like that, but we're all a work in progress. You know, one of the failures I've seen in people dealing with brethren is they take somebody that's new in the faith and they expect them to be just like them. And they weren't just like them 20 years ago, you know, but they want them to be mature now. And it just doesn't work that way. We're all a work in progress. God is trying to accomplish something in our lives. As he said in Isaiah 64, verse 8, "Now, O Lord, you're our Father, we're the clay, you're the potter, and we all are the work of your hand." And we are an ongoing work. So understand that about you and each other. Don't give up. If you're not all you should be now, let the Lord keep working on you and cooperate with Him. Help Him. Go with Him. Don't work against the Lord. Acts 9, I give you as an example. When Ananias first heard the news, it's not Ananias and Sapphira, but Ananias the preacher. When Ananias first heard the news that he had to go to the place where Saul of Tarsus was staying, and the Lord said for him to go there, he spoke up to the Lord and he says, "Lord, I have heard about this man from many, how much harm he's done to you and your cause and to the saints in Jerusalem. And this man has the authority from the chief priest to arrest and bind all who call upon your name." I don't know what Ananias, if he thought the Lord just didn't know about this or what, but it's like he's talking to God and said, "You may not know, but this guy's trouble. Lord, I've heard about him." Thankfully, the Lord doesn't think that way, because the Lord came back and says, "Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel." Now, I don't want to over-dramatize this, but here's the fact. The Lord didn't look at Saul of Tarsus as he was then. He looked at him as what he would be and could become. The Lord looks at all of us that way. He's not just merely thinking, look at that guy right now, there's nothing to him. The Lord isn't stuck there. He sees potential. He sees what you can turn into if you'll apply yourself in His life. And so what God saw that Saul of Tarsus, becoming the Apostle Paul would be, is a great spokesman for the cause of Christ. And the Lord was right. The Lord saw exactly what he was going to become. He was God's chosen vessel. The Lord took Saul of Tarsus, a marred, messed up fella, and reshaped him into something that could be pleasing in His sight. That's glorious. That's something we all could appreciate and should appreciate, what he became. Now, just a few closing thoughts about this, and the lesson is yours. The Lord said, we read that earlier, He said He had the right to call you a vessel of honor or a vessel of dishonor. He molds you into something, but it's the Lord's choice about that, what you become. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, Paul uses again some of these terminologies, and he talks to us about what we would be. He says, in a great house, let's say a really nice home, there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but there's also some made out of wood and clay. And some of those things in that house are made for very honorable purposes, and some of them for dishonorable purposes. And what he means by that, some are very fine and nice and all of that. I've preached stuff like this before, and you may recall what I had to say, but you have a vessel in your home, and it's a pitcher for iced tea or some drink, water or whatever you want to put in it, and that's a vessel of honor. You have another vessel in your home you throw trash into. That's the dishonor. You're putting junk in one, and you're putting what you consume in your body on another. You're the one that decided, in other words, because of the nature of what they are, then that's what they're good for. Well, God's looking at it the same way. He looked back there at Pharaoh's rebellion against his will, and he said, "So Pharaoh, you're a vessel of dishonor. I'll use you that way." And he looked at guys like Moses, and he said, "That's a vessel of honor because they want to please me." So he says we need to be aware of this. There's two kinds of vessels. Therefore, if anybody cleanses himself from the latter, that's the dishonorable things, he will be a vessel of honor. So what Paul's really asking us to stop and contemplate is, if God's going to make us into something that's useful to Him, then let's become vessels of honor. Let's make the choice to become that which is very honorable and pleasing in God's sight. And so he says, get rid of the dishonorable things of your life so that you can become a vessel of honor, and that way you'll be sanctified, that is, set apart and useful for the master, and God will have prepared you for every good work. So anything that needs to be done, God could use you rightfully to accomplish and do. Become a useful vessel. Well, I think we can end it right there then. Our goal is to let God shape and make us and become what He would have us to be, and turn into something that's useful instead of something that's disgraceful to Him. We can be dishonorable or we can be an honorable person, but we've got to let God turn us into that and then be honorable so that God can make us that, that which can be a vessel of honor, prepared in a good way for everything God would like to use us for in a good way. Don't forget who's in charge. He's the potter, we're the clay. Don't forget you got to yield to Him for any of this to do any good. Don't forget to be a vessel of honor. These are our goals. This is what being a Christian is all about. If you need to obey the gospel and come be baptized into Christ, we have the water ready, clothing ready. All things are ready for you this evening. Only your heart has to decide and make the move. If you are a Christian that's not done right in God's sight, I'd kind of picture you, if you don't mind me doing it so, still true whether you mind or not, but think of yourself kind of like that marred vessel. The potter was working and it didn't turn out right. Okay, well, I've got some good news. The whole point of that parable was, then let God start again and get you into what you need to be. Start yielding back to Him so that He can reform in you what needs to happen so that you can be a very useful thing to Him. Okay, we got marred. Let's don't make that the end of the story. I don't know what happened with those little handles that was given to me like I was talking about earlier. Somewhere along the way somebody tossed them out. They didn't keep them. Maybe they weren't fit to be on there. I don't know what happened. All I know is they never got used. They just wound up in a preacher's cabinet. That's not what they were for, though. They were meant for a better purpose for themselves. I don't want us to be just wind up nothing. Let's be something useful to God. Appreciate your attention. Let's stand now and sing the song.